start with a bit of an object lesson. I have here in my hand a set of keys. And I'm sure that each of you as well, whether it's in your pocket or maybe in a purse or something else, you have a set of keys like this with you. And I know you might not know this, but get ready for this. So keys allow a person to get into things and also to lock things to keep others out. Rocket science, I know, but that's what keys do. And so here then, I have a key for my car, which allows me to get into the car, to turn the car on, and to go places. It also allows me to lock the car so as to keep others out. On here as well, I also have a key for my home, which allows me to do the same thing, to open the door and also to lock it. That's what keys do. And so in this morning's passage, what we're going to see is that Jesus has given to the church, that is the local body of believers, the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And so our main passage is going to be Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 to 20. And our main lesson for this morning is this. And I've decided to state the main lesson as a question and answer. So what authority does Jesus give to his church, to a local congregation of believers? What authority? The answer, and this will be our main point, is that he gives them the keys of the kingdom. We're going to see what this means and how it applies specifically to Berwick Baptist Church. And as we do so, I'm going to be drawing on this excellent little book by Jonathan Leeman on church basics, understanding the authority of the congregation. A great little book. If you'd like to read it, you could read it probably in an afternoon, no doubt. Let me know, and I'd be happy to get you a copy. And so Matthew chapter 16, and we're going to start reading at verse 13. Again, I hope you have your Bible, and you can turn there with me. Matthew chapter 16, beginning at verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. And so then, as we continue our way through the Gospel of Matthew, so we're following right now the Revised Common Lectionary, and the readings for the last several weeks and the weeks ahead of us are in the Gospel of Matthew. So we're spending some time in the Gospel of Matthew. And the section that we're in is all about uncovering the identity of Jesus. Who is Jesus? And this section is from chapter 13, verse 54, all the way to the end of the passage I just read this morning, chapter 16 and verse 20. And really, Matthew 16, verses 13 to 20, serves as the climax of this section of the Gospel of Matthew, where Peter confesses Jesus to be the long-awaited Messiah, the Son of the living God. The setting for this scene from the Gospel is Caesarea Philippi, which was about 40 kilometers or so north of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus asks his disciples two questions. Who do people say that I am? And then, who do you say that I am? In answer to the first question, they offer John the Baptist, Elijah, and Jeremiah. And as my study Bible points out, this would have been a common Jewish expectation at the time, based on Deuteronomy 18, that a great prophet would one day come. And so that's why they offered that answer, why the people were expecting those particular people. However, Jesus then narrows the question and asks the disciples directly, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter, speaking on behalf of the group, confesses Jesus to be the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah, the Son of the living God. And so Jesus then confirms this answer by saying to Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." This is an important point to note here, that it is God who opens our eyes to see who Jesus is. It's God who opens our eyes to see that Jesus is the Christ, the long-awaited Messiah. As Jonathan Leeman, in the little book I pointed out earlier, as he points out, Jesus here is concerned with both a what and a who. He's concerned with what is a right confession, and the answer is that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and who knows it. So Jesus here is concerned with a what and a who. And just as a brief side note, the question that Jesus asks his disciples is the most important question. Because the answer that we give to that question, who do we think that Jesus is, has eternal consequences. What we think about Jesus has eternal consequences. Will we say, as many people have said in the past, that Jesus is simply a great teacher in the long line of great teachers, and that's it? Or will we say with Peter and the other apostles, the other disciples, that no, Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God? For that is the only response that makes us right with God. And this, of course, is none other than the gospel. That God, the creator of the universe, who we are accountable to, this holy God, sent his one and only Son, Jesus, to die for sinners like you and me, so that everyone who places their trust and faith in him has life in his name. And so I would encourage you, if you've never placed your trust and faith in Jesus, to not wait another second. And so then we move on. We come to verse 18, which is actually one of the most debated verses in all of church history. And so verse 18, just to remind ourselves, says this, where Jesus says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." And so it's important to point out here that Jesus is doing a little play on words here, because in Greek, Peter's name, Petros, means stone, and then the word that he uses for rock in Greek is Petra. And so you see the similarity there. And so he's using a play on words to say that on this rock I will build my church. And so those in the Roman Catholic tradition would say that what we're seeing here is the establishment of the office of the Pope. That's what they would say, that yes, Peter was of special significance, and anyone who stands in his succession has particular authority and power given directly from Christ. We, however, would not say that. We would say that what is happening here is that Jesus will build his church on Peter and the confession that Peter gives. And so as my study Bible puts it, Peter, what Jesus will build his church on is Peter in his role as a confessing person of Jesus the Messiah, confessing Jesus to be the Messiah. And it's on that Jesus will build his church. Or as Jonathan Leeman puts it in a great little way that I think is a great way to memorize here, he says, Jesus promises to build his church on this rock. And what is that rock? Well, it's this particular confessor confessing the right confession. This particular confessor confessing the right confession. And so that's what Jesus will build his church on. And it's important to note here that the use of the word church in this passage is one of only two uses of that word, ecclesia, in all of our four Gospels. And we're going to look at the other one in just a moment. And so Jesus says as well that the gates of hell will not be able to prevail against his church. And here's another side note for you. This should be incredibly encouraging to you, to know that the gates of hell, not death, not the gates of hell, will be able to triumph over Christ's church. He is building his church, and he will not fail. I want to skip down just for a second to verse 20 before we look at verse 19, because that's what we're going to spend the rest of our time on. And so verse 20, Jesus says, or we're told, Matthew tells us, that then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. You might think, that's kind of a curious thing. Don't you, as a pastor of this church, always tell us to tell others about Jesus? That we want to tell as many people as we can that Jesus is the Messiah? Well, the answer to that is yes, of course, and we see that from Matthew 28, that we are to tell the world who Jesus is. But in this particular instance, Jesus wants them not to tell people because of the confused expectations of what the Messiah would actually do. The people at this time thought that what the Messiah would do would come as a conquering king. That the Messiah would come as a conquering king, would overthrow Israel's oppressors, in this case the Roman Empire, and would make things great for the Jewish people. What they fail to realize, that we know now that Jesus has come, is that there really are two comings of Messiah. The first coming, where Jesus did come as the Messiah and died on a cross to save us from our sins. And then down the road, there will be a second coming, where he will come and make all things right and make all things new. And so this is called the Messianic secret, and that's why we have those words here. And so we move on then now to verse 19, which says this: I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And this will be the main focus of the rest of our time together. And so here Jesus gives to Peter and the apostles the keys of the kingdom of heaven, which comes with the ability or the authority to bind and to loose things on earth, and that will actually happen in heaven as well. And so this passage needs to be read alongside another passage in Matthew. If you have your Bible, just flip over one page to Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 and 20. I don't have this on the screen, but I'm going to read it here for you. And you'll notice very similar terminology is used here by Jesus. And in this passage, we come to the second place where the word church is used in the gospel. And so Jesus says this: if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. There's the second time the word is used. Tell it to the church, the ecclesia. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And then verse 18 says this, which I hope sounds familiar to you: truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he goes on to say again, truly I tell you, that where 2 of you on earth agree about anything that you ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am with them. And so in chapter 16, Jesus gives the keys of the kingdom to Peter and the apostles. But then here in this passage, Jesus gives the keys of the kingdom of heaven to the church. And so if we read this passage again, and I add a bit of a Texas way of saying you, a plural you to it, you'll understand what I'm getting at here. So Jesus says, truly I tell y'all, whatever y'all bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you all loose on earth will be loose in heaven. The words there are in the plural. So Jesus gives the keys of the kingdom as well to the gathered congregation of believers. And so every member of Berwick Baptist Church in here, that means us. That we as a church, a local body of believers, have the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And this is the basis of all of the church's authority. And so what in the world does this mean, to have the keys of the kingdom? I agree here with Jonathan Leeman, who says that what it means is that the church, the gathered body of believers, has the authority to do what Jesus does in Matthew 16. To say that this is a right confession and this is a right confessor. The what and the who. And so really what this comes down then to is membership and discipline. Based on a person's confession and their life, we say that this person is or is not a Christian, and therefore is or is not, or cannot be a member of a church. Powerful authority that we have. But please do not misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the church has the authority to make someone a Christian or to make them not a Christian. That is not what I'm saying here. But rather, as Jonathan Leeman does in his little book, he compares what authority we have to that of a judge. So think about a judge in a courtroom. When they hear all the evidence, they don't make the law, and they don't make the person guilty or not guilty. But just on the information that they have, they say this person is guilty or this person is not guilty. Or think of it as a jury. Same thing in a trial by jury. The jury does not make the law, and they do not make a person guilty or innocent, but rather they, based on the information that they receive, say this person is guilty or this person is not guilty. And the church has that same authority. We can say to people, based on your life and your testimony of the impact of God in your life, we can say this person is a Christ follower or this person is not. And on that basis, welcome them in to membership. And I know this stuff is a bit heady, but it's super important. It really is super important for the church to grasp if we are to understand the authority that we have as a local congregation of believers. And I'm not just making this stuff up here. This is what it means for us to be as Baptist congregationalists, that the authority rests on the congregation. So this interpretation of this passage is a reason why we as Baptists are congregationalists. We believe that the ultimate authority under Christ resides not in the Pope, as the Roman Catholic Church believes, not in bishops, as the Anglican Church believes, not in a group of elders, as the Presbyterian Church believes, but in the gathered congregation of believers. That makes us congregationalists. And so then, just very briefly, a few points of application. What does this mean for us as Berwick Baptist Church? And I hope that this is razor-sharp application. One thing it means is that we ought to take our responsibility very seriously. We ought to wield the keys of the kingdom and do that very seriously, to think deeply as we wield these keys. And it means that we also ought to take membership very seriously, that it means something to be a member of this body of believers. Second, we should expect things from members. We should expect, for example, that they attend church on a regular basis as they are able. Found a great quote from Alex Duke, who says this: "I've never met a growing and mature Christian who doesn't regularly attend a gospel-preaching church." It means also that we should expect certain things from members, which is exactly why we have a church covenant, that we are to live a certain way. It means that we should expect members to believe certain things, which is why we have a statement of faith, that we at least believe those things and don't believe things contrary to them. And then finally, we should expect people to faithfully attend member meetings where a lot of important business takes place. Number 3, every member of Berwick Baptist Church, not just the pastors and the deacons, should care about who is joining this church. Number 4, we ought to take church discipline seriously. I know that's a controversial thing, and down the road we'll have more time to talk about that, but we should take it seriously as it's laid out in Matthew 18. And then 5th and finally, we should reclaim the practice of congregational affirmation of new members. I like to visit different church websites so I can learn all that I can, and I found on Crawford Avenue Baptist Church that they have this order for welcoming new members into their church. That they first attend a new members class so they can learn all about the church, that they then have an interview with a pastor to get to know them, that they know the gospel, and just hear about their life story. And then the pastors offer up a recommendation to the congregation, and then 4th and finally, the congregation then affirms that this person is indeed a member, a Christian, and then therefore can become a member. And that just is what it means to wield the keys of the kingdom. And so then, in conclusion, what authority does Jesus give to the church? Well, he gives them the keys of the kingdom, which is the authority to affirm a gospel what and a gospel who. To say to this person that they are a genuine Christ follower or not. And on that basis, to welcome them into membership, or, if we're talking about church discipline, to exclude them from membership. And so, every time that you pull out your keys from your pocket, to unlock your house, to unlock your car, remember the keys of the kingdom and the authority and the responsibility that you have, that we have as Berwick Baptist Church.